We are families, we are caregivers, we are parents to children with disabilities and medical complexities. We are rarely familiar. We get together to learn, to relate, and to laugh a lot while we share each other's unique family experiences of raising the rarest of the rare. Our goal is to unite, inspire, educate, and empower people living a rarely familiar life. And we're so glad you're here.
Hi, welcome to Rarely Familiar. This is Tram, here with my friend Haley, where we dig into the realities of raising the rarest of the rare. Today, we're going to get familiar with Danny's dose and educate you about EMS protocols and gaps for people who need time-critical medication administration during life-threatening emergencies. And we'll talk about Danny's dose in a minute, but first, let's do our check-in. Haley, what's going on?
We had a pretty good week. I'm bummed that Jen can't be here with us today. She had an emergency with her son, Julian, and that's why there's three of us. One of us is inevitably going to get pulled away for different reasons. So that's a bit of a bummer, but for me, we've had a pretty good week. I think a win for us recently was a while back, I had talked about the school pictures and the fact that my son has some major sensitivity issues. And every time we would go to get our school picture taken, he would freak out about the flash and he'd put his head down and all you'd get was the top of his head, or he would not look up at all, or he'd look away, or we were having a really hard time with school photos. We were advocating a little bit more for our son this time, and we were able to get them to give us an option with no flash. This is now a systems change in the way that they take pictures in Minnesota. So hopefully they're going to offer that option at all the schools. So Felix got his picture taken with no flash. It turned out pretty good. I'm going to show, can you see it? It's cute. Right?
That's really cute.
It's really cute. The color's a little off. It's not perfect because a flash they've really perfected the way you take a portrait. However, for kids with light sensitivity, all of that, I think they did a pretty good job. And I'm super excited that now perhaps that can be an option for any kid who has issues with light sensitivity. So that felt like not only a win for our family, but a win for the greater disability community. So that felt good. Mission accomplished, right?
Funny that you say that because Sadie had retakes. She wasn't there for the week that they had the original picture day. And so I sent her with a hairbrush and let's hope that it turns out because Sadie is deafblind. Sadie's not like on cue, ready to go. I think most kids are never on cue so we'll see what happens, but it's just a one option only take. So we'll see. But for our guests, I buy every picture, even if it's a bad one. And then I do a little meme with it. Like, what do you think Sadie was thinking on this day? But I did want to ask that flash and a possibility, but I thought I'd give them some time since you just worked through it with the company.
Next year,
we'll get that process in place.
The first day of school, before pictures are usually that first month or two of school, like start advocating for your kids and hopefully, we have that option.
And so perfect segue. We're going to go ahead and talk about some of the advocacy work that Danny's Dose is the name of the organization. It was started by Darlene Shelton, and Darlene is our guest today, and Andrea Nelson, who is the advocate in Minnesota and is on the board of Danny's Dose. So I'm going to let Darlene, if you want to start and introduce yourself and then talk about yourself and how you started Danny's Dose.
Hi, everyone. It's really great to be here and get to share with all of the families like ours that live every day with a rare disease. I've already opened up with the fact that we're a rare disease family. We happen to be a hemophilia family. It was a surprise diagnosis with my first grandson. We're almost to the week of 13 years ago. We now know that it is in my daughter-in-law's family, and we also have 2 of the 3 granddaughters that are affected. So we have 4 in the family with hemophilia, and that is an underclotting disorder. And because of that, we learned of outdated emergency treatment protocols as they apply to administering any medications not on an ambulance. When you have a rare disease or a chronic disease, your medications are rare, so they're not on ambulances. And we were so shocked when we found this out. And it was 3 years after he was diagnosed. So it was in 2014. And really, no one was doing anything. Even the organizations that knew about the regulations, it was just that common, well, what do we do about it? It's EMS regulations. It's just too much. We just don't know what we can do. And we really knew that just was not an okay answer. And we learned of stories in our hemophilia community of people that had already died because they couldn't get clotting factor quickly enough and theirs wasn't used. We knew that people would die. At that time, we only knew about bleeding disorders. So we didn't know any of the other families with the other conditions, but we were smart enough to know there had to be other conditions. I mean, there's not just one condition in the world. So we were smart enough to know there was going to be more conditions. There were going to be more people than we knew about. And I really just didn't sleep for about 2 weeks. And I knew God had given me a new mission. No more getting on an airplane and going to another country and building homes. It was now in the United States, and it was to save the lives of our families and our patients here on our own soil. And that's how Danny's Dose was started. And we're now 9 years old. And we've made some great advancements. We now have 19 states that have done either a bill or a regulatory change that now allows paramedics to administer those patient carried time critical prescription medications. And of course, we're talking about IV or intramuscular injections. We are never talking about a pill in a bottle because that's way too much unknown.
That's perfect. So I'm assuming your son is named Danny, or your grandson is named Danny, hence the
Yes.
Danny's Dose. Why don't we introduce Andrea?
Okay.
And if you could tell the audience your name, what you do, and how you got involved.
I'm Andrea Nelson, and I live in the St. Cloud area. And my son was diagnosed with a rare condition of his adrenal glands when he was 10 years old. And it was actually a misdiagnosis. He was a false negative on his newborn screen. So it took us 10 years to get him diagnosed. He has adrenal insufficiency and a rare form of it. And I found out that he needed to have medication and be dependent on steroids. If he was hurt or severely ill, he needed to have an injection. And so he carried that around everywhere he went. And I went like a year. I would just knock on friends' doors when he was going to have a play date and say, hey, this is his emergency injection. If you don't feel comfortable, call 911. And so I did that for about a year. And I joined some Facebook groups, and I kept seeing Darlene's post. And I reached out to Darlene, and I think we talked that same day. And I noticed all of the work she had been doing. And so I wanted that for Minnesota.
And how we met was you guys were presenting at the Epilepsy Foundation Expo. And I ran into your booth and I was like, so tell me about your organization. And I was dumbfounded when you told me there are no protocols in Minnesota. We're working on that legislation right now. If you need rescue medications, there isn't a protocol set up. They can't go into your bags and look for it. And I was like, wait a minute, but I have these rescue meds. And they're like, yep, they can't pull it out of your bag. They can't search your personal things to save your life that you have that medication set up for. So perfectly laid out plan in your head is not going to translate. Finding you was just a blessing because my eyes were opened about what I do in an emergency case situation. So I'm going to take a step back because we always like to open up with a fun fact about yourself before we get into these serious topics. So Darlene, what fun fact do you have to share about yourself?
Okay, I literally cannot decide. But since I mentioned mission trips,
Yes.
you guys are going to love this. I have actually used an outdoor toilet or outhouse in 7 different countries. So if anybody
That's
can top
amazing.
that,
Okay, can you name the 7 countries?
yes, Romania, Italy, Budapest, Hungary, Germany, Mexico, Nicaragua, and Trinidad.
That's 8.
Wow.
Oh, 8.
Hey,
Oh, in the
that's
United
eight.
States, of course. So I guess
Yeah.
9.
Yeah. You are a strong, good woman. You're
And
doing
Trum
mission
knows
work.
toileting. Trum is a big advocate for adult changing tables and toileting. We talk about it a lot.
Way
So-
too much. So Andrea, what is your
Perfect,
fun
that's your
fact?
fun fact.
So my husband and I have a hobby farm, And and so we have all rescue animals at our farm.
Oh, how many animals? Or
Now
about?
we're down to one horse and two miniature donkeys.
Oh,
We rescued two dogs. I think we've rescued also like 7 other horses. And so we just like rehabbed them and then sent them on their way.
oh,
My PCA, she volunteers at Animal Sanctuary. I say my PCA, my son's PCA. She volunteers at Animal Sanctuary. Her true love is animals and Felix.
it's amazing. Good for you. Good for you. I have a hard time just keeping my child alive. So,
On a farm.
so Darlene, tell us how you started Danny's Dose and then how you started to first realize, how am I going to get to one state outside of Missouri? How are you going to spread this word out, and where you are on even possibly getting federal legislation done?
When we started in Missouri, and let me preface this, I do accounting, and everybody else in the family is kind of business and engineers. Nobody's medical, and
Right.
none of us are political science majors by any means.
Yeah.
So even to start in Missouri, I started calling my Department of Health because I like to go to the top.
Right.
And they don't call you back, by the way. So after 6 months, I still hadn't gotten a call. So I just showed up at our Capitol, and my representative was a good friend. And I said, do you know this issue exists? And what can we do? Because I can't get a hold of anyone. So I knew I had started that way in Missouri. So my inexperienced idea was that as I met other families, that we would kind of do the same thing, that we would get a good-hearted, compassionate, 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 or 8 legislators that would help, and that would get us in the door of the right people under your state Department of Health, which EMS sits under, and then be able to get in the door and meet the right people in EMS to be able to even start the conversation. So when Missouri passed, I didn't have a plan on which states would be next. I really knew that just that lady in Missouri would not be able to make a big impact in other states, and I would have to have families. So it was really just as Andrea and I talked earlier today, we had passed our bill in the House when she connected with me, because she remembers congratulating us when our bill went through in 2017. And so for Missouri, that's SB 503 2017, if you ever want to look it up. It's also linked on our website. And she said, I want to do the same thing in Minnesota. And we did a hashtag, make Minnesota #2. And really had only about 6 people that were helping work on the legislative initiative, but connected with Senator Western, and he was very compassionate, and he was the first one to step up to say, yeah, this is common sense. We need to make changes in Minnesota. And so that is what made Minnesota the second state.
Got it. Now, how long did it take you from the point that you decided you were going to do this in Missouri? Did it take one session to get the bill through, or did it take several sessions? How did it all go down?
Actually, it really truly took one session. So we started in 2015 with just some awareness and a very first draft of the bill that we did file on the last day that you can file a bill in Missouri, because I found out there are some legislators that absolutely will never vote yes on the first year on a bill.
Yeah.
So our plan was, okay, technically, because we filed it in 15, now when we refile in January of 2016, it won't be a first year bill. We can get those legislators to vote yes. And we hit the ground running. January 5th, we held a lunch and we had packets of information. My daughter-in-law and I went every 2 weeks with the grandkids to our state capitol, and we just mapped out 4th floor, 3rd floor, 2nd floor, and then we repeated and did it again. So I knew that plan worked, and that's really also what we did in Minnesota, except we was really Andrea mostly.
Yeah. That's amazing. So, Andrea, how long did it take for you to get from the point that you wrote the bill up to it actually passing?
When we first started, we realized there was already one that was in place,
Okay.
and it was actually just for adrenal insufficiency. And that one, I think, it didn't even get a reading in 2000. Yeah, and then 2017, I had met Darlene and I knew that her grandkids had hemophilia and they were going through the exact same thing as our family, just different diseases. And I'm like, how can we single it out? How can we just do it for one when there's all these other families that need it too? And so we went in and we tried to rewrite the language to get it for everybody. And it actually did pass the House and the Senate the first time. And what happened was it was tied into the omnibus bill and it was vetoed by the governor. We went the second time or the next time, and we ended up passing the House and the Senate, and it was a single bill, or how do you call that?
Yep.
There's a word for it though.
Independent.
Yeah, an independent standalone bill. And it ended up passing the House and the Senate unanimously in 2019.
Darlene sent out an email and I was on her emailer, so then I just tagged along for the signing. So I felt so bad, but it was nice to see because Sadie was only a couple years old. And so it was nice to see advocacy work. And that was my first inspiration to be like, all right, I now need to get into this. But I mentally and physically wasn't probably ready because I was just treading water to stay alive with Sadie because Sadie has so many complexities. But it was an amazing experience. And then I got to meet some other people, like you came up to introduce yourself to me. And then I met some other families and it made me realize like that was like the inspiration point to make me say, all right, we can do this, you know? And so Haley said it before, we finally got the bill passed for adult size changing tables to get put in place last year. So it is amazing that as parents we see the missing piece out in the world, and we have to make that change to make it better for everybody. Thank you ladies both for all the work that you've done, because it's sparked a lot of inspiration for all of us, so thank you.
The most success stories that we hear about people, just parents, right, that see a need and say, oh my gosh, why is this like this? This needs to change. There's got to be a better way. And just grassroots effort, start flyering, start talking to people. I think the more we say that this is possible, the more we'll start to identify more of these changes that need to be made and keep writing more bills.
Now, we all know this. Half the battle is giving the awareness that the issue exists, getting this legislation written. So now talk to me about what we are still in terms of getting the process after the bill and legislation is written. Where are we on processes, and if we know what battles you guys face in that end?
Missouri is doing amazing things. Darlene's done amazing, and I think Minnesota, we have so much work to do in Minnesota, but there's been a lot of hardships for Minnesota EMS. And so nothing has been implemented, but I do feel like our message is getting out in Minnesota. And I feel just by attending meetings and seeing people come up to me and they know who I am, they want to help. Since the change there was an EMSRB, so the regulatory board, and then the legislators noticed that a lot of things weren't getting done the way that they wanted to. So it went through an audit, and then they did this EMS task force through the legislature. And then they actually just this spring passed the bill. So it's now going to be the Office of EMS. So Dylan Ferguson took over the EMSRB, and now he's the director of the Office of EMS. He's doing a great job. And I just hope we'll just continue to reach out to him and he'll be able to help us once this all gets set up. I think it's going to go a lot faster. It's been 5.5 years.
What was the most throughout this whole process, what was the most surprising thing to you that happened?
I think when you meet with the legislators, they loved seeing moms, and like Darlene's grandma, and you guys have done work too, because they're real stories. We're real people. We're showing them that
We're lawyers. We're not.
Yeah, we're not lobbyists, and we just want to have a better life for our kids. And so when I know Darlene brought her grandkids with, and so I actually did that too. And I would bring Isaac with me because I felt like it was so important. If I didn't have Isaac with me, I had a picture of him with me. And because then they can make a connection. And I was surprised by how they were so willing to help. Just how all of them signed on to this. And then
Right.
probably the unanimous vote. I can remember watching it and it still makes me teary because like they were all just green, green, green.
So you said Isaac is
19.
19. So now he is advocating for himself. And so watching him advocate for himself and learning his voice, what do you think has been the biggest learning for him in this whole process?
I think he realized that it's so important to have a voice and he saw everything from being misdiagnosed. At 10 years old, we went to doctor appointments and they would send us away. And I think that created both of us because we're like, we're not going to give up. We're going to keep on trying to figure out what's going on with you. We're going to keep on going to these appointments. That started our advocacy journey together. He's an athlete too. And when he was diagnosed, he was well into being a 3-sport athlete. And he said, I'm not giving this up. And I don't care, even though a serious injury is more dangerous for him. But he was determined. And I think that really helped him stay on track too with being an advocate because he wants to continue to be an athlete.
Which he should. He should have every right and be feeling safe. And I think that is hard to watch because I was reading the notes of the last EMS board that you went to, and it read Isaac has to carry his own meds, but yet no one can administer them. That safety protocol is a stopgap in him trying to survive for doing something he loves. From what I hear, it sounds like there's still work to be done to get the process correct across the whole state. So that is something we can all sign on to help you with. Is that correct?
Yes. Even 9 years later, EMS regulatory process is confusing. I can tell you
Okay.
that right off the bat. So when you
Okay.
pass a bill, it is your state government stating that we approve of this to be done. And it does, based from your legal team, it does also give the additional liability protections for the medical director who allows for their individuals, their paramedics, to administer the medications. But implementation has to happen. So that means their scope of practice has to be updated. And then normally they want education to go with it, at least a general education on the basics of at least the highest population of the conditions.
Okay.
And that is something that with COVID was really put a stop in everything. We just stopped in our tracks during COVID. Right. Luckily, when COVID opened back up, things progressed exponentially in all other areas. Sadly, at the same time, Minnesota was having issues. So it has to be kind of a trickle down effect. Mm-hmm. And that's where we've hit the snag is one, COVID happened. The last thing on their minds was the rare, sorry, I'm going to say this, the one-off patient in our local community that may have a call because they were overwhelmed. So we got pushed to the wayside. After COVID opened back up, we were able to have another call. That's the call that Isaac was on. And another email blast went out to all of the EMS captains, reminding them of the bill that passed, reminding them of the ability that their paramedics have, and reminding them that they need to implement the regulations within their EMS service. What I hope can happen is that with this new regulatory office of EMS, we are not completely sure how that system is going to work. But in most states, they have a state scope of practice. So even though we have a bill, then to implement the scope of practice that's a little bit more detailed on actually administering the meds.
Yep.
I hope that that can happen. Meanwhile, on the Danny's Dose side, we are working on EMS treatment guidelines that will then build into education. And we are just finalizing, doing the final markups and review for adrenal insufficiency and bleeding disorders. We only started with those because they're the two highest populations in high risk. We'll be doing 4 more in 2025, and we'll continue the process each year as long as we've got breath in our lungs to continue. So trying to help EMS on that side with already established treatment guidelines that they can just pick up and use, and established by state and national EMS medical directors and the medical specialist for each of the conditions. So we're also trying to help in that gap that exists.
Okay. And so your scope is for IV medications. And so right now, is that my understanding?
IV or intramuscular, IM,
Okay.
either one.
Oh, shots. Okay. For Sadie, she has epilepsy. So then we have rescue meds. You also created for the other population where our kids are nonverbal. Can you walk us through some of the tools that you've created, like headrests? So if you could talk through some of those tools that you've created as well.
Yes. So as you mentioned earlier, when I was talking about they can't go through a purse,
Yes.
one of the main things, particularly in an automobile, is you need to have an obvious, clear alert. So I happen to create a bright yellow headrest cover that goes on the headrest of the car, has a pocket, because step 2, you also need to go meet your local EMS service and get a treatment plan. You get emergency orders from your specialist. So it's on letterhead, signed, dated, updated annually, just like they leave for a nurse when you're in the hospital. It's orders on your medication and the proper dosing and the route of administration. So emergency orders, you keep those emergency orders in the pocket in the headrest cover. Also, you have to keep your medications in a clearly marked, we call it our go bag, backpack, fanny pack, whatever fits, depending on how big your box is. Absolutely do not remove your medications from the original packaging. They have to know that they've not been tampered with. So medications with a prescription label in a clearly marked bag that is not mom's purse, because
Yes.
in most states they are not allowed to go through purses because that's your private information. And you need those emergency orders on letterhead, signed, dated, updated annually, not a picture on your phone of the orders. At this date and time, right now, a paper document is as good as we've got. There is no recognized electronic version, particularly in Minnesota. You've got to have those orders with you. And when you go set up that treatment plan, you're going to take a copy of those orders. I also suggest looking up, and we have a link to the bill on our website, www.dannystels.com, a copy of that bill. So in case their particular medical director or their captain has not said anything, and you go to have a meeting and they may not even know that the bill passed, you can actually present a copy of that bill to them. Then that will open up a very good conversation.
We live in a huge city. Haley and I both live in Minneapolis. Going to your local EMS, how does one find your local EMS? Is that the fire department usually?
I honestly will just get my phone and Google EMS service nearest to, and either put the zip code or put the town, because we also call before we go on vacation, because yes, I'm that crazy grandmother. So I actually Google it and I help people find theirs. So I'll just Google, like I live in Dexter, Missouri, EMS, and I know where it is, but pretend EMS service nearest. And if you live in a large town, maybe Main Street, St. Paul, Minnesota. I just use Main Street because that's a general. And what's really nice, most of the services are so kind and helpful. If you call the wrong one, they'll say, oh, that's not our service area. Here's the number you need, and let me dispatch you over.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's happened to me
so that's
so
a good
many
helpful
times.
hint. All right. Any other helpful hints as someone is learning to do all these things that if they don't fit into an IV, what else have you learned on this journey that you could help share with other families?
One thing I will tell you, that the intranasal spray for the seizures is also included in a patient carried time critical medication, because that's been in the conversations. When we started, it didn't exist. That has come around in the past 9 years. Basically something that's not pill form, because even with the intranasal spray, it's packaged to the point that you really couldn't tamper with it.
Correct. So that's good to know about the nasal spray option.
Yes. They consider the nasal spray just as important as an intramuscular injection or an IV. It's a medication that needs to be timely, immediately, sooner rather than later. And quite honestly, I don't know really, there's not very many pills that are life-saving because most life-saving meds need to get in the body quickly.
Fast.
That's why pills are just not really regarded. And sadly, let's face it, there are some crazy people in the world that do want to harm their children, and they could easily replace pills in a bottle. So that's not something that we advocate for at all.
Got it. That helps. All right. So then you also said when you go on vacation, you find your local EMS, just so you know.
No, we call them.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
And
So
you
when
tell
we're
them-
going to go on vacation, and I can even speak for Andrea, when Isaac has a football game, so we actually call and say, we're going to be in your area so and so dates, and we're a family of 4 with hemophilia B, ranging in severities. But if we had an emergency, we would need clotting factor administered. And I just say, I want to be sure that you're aware. I want to make sure that you have protocols in place, that you could administer the meds and help and be able to help us. What do you need from me? And I usually call about 2 weeks ahead of time.
Wow. Okay. Great.
And then I can follow up, because normally they'll say, oh, well, you, and I tell them, like, we have a treatment plan with our local EMS and we have emergency orders. They almost always ask us to email those over. And the emergency orders has the name of the medication and the dosing.
Right.
But, and then I usually call back like a week before, see if there's any final questions, if they feel good. So far, we've not had a vacation area that has told us, no, we absolutely will not administer your meds.
Okay.
Now, I'm going
Haley,
to
you had a
preface that with the
question.
fact that we don't go on a lot of vacations.
Yeah, we hear you.
Yeah.
Let me ask the dumb question here. So we are a family who Felix is not on a lot of meds. Not to say it wouldn't be in our future. Like, he is at risk for epilepsy. So like all of these conversations are valid for me but I'm asking the dumb question about the EMS, because I've heard that you need to go to your local EMS. You need to go to your, like, when I go on, I'm trying it right now. When I go and search EMS services, tell me exactly what that is. Help me.
So, and you might put, it should be EMS service, but it may say ambulance service.
Okay. So
And
you're
like I
talking about-
said, pick the first one that sounds like reasonably close.
Yeah.
And call them.
So usually
They've
it's like also
always
your
been
fire
nice to me.
department. Your fire department would also be your EMS.
Maybe.
So you
Depends
can,
on
yeah.
who
So
you
you, yeah,
name.
right. Depends
Yeah.
on how big it is. But you should look. And so there is also a difference between a paramedic and a technician, a tech,
Yes.
EMT tech.
Yes.
So paramedics have more schooling and can do these processes where a tech is just life-saving.
Very good.
I
Yes.
did research this before I came
Yes.
on.
Yes. Paramedics are the only ones in most states that have the ability to administer or make a decision regarding medications.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I guess I'm just looking at who is the closest person to come, who would be called immediately, and do they have the rights that they need to administer life-saving?
And technically in Minnesota, yes, they do. They just may not be aware that they do.
Yeah. Yeah. Andrea, talk to me, because Isaac is 19. He's in college. And so he's out in the world. He doesn't have a nurse standing next to him. Like, how does he make sure that in case something happens, if his friends can help him, how does he do it?
Last year, he told a few friends. And he's actually playing college football, Division III. And so right away, the athletic trainer for the college. So we had a meeting with him right away. We had a meeting with the school nurse. And that was at like the first day when they did their walkthrough of the school. So that went great. And then we called the local EMS, so the EMS department that's closest to the school. The first year, he was just those people. He was very shy about it, wasn't really sure how people would react to him and playing football. And he didn't want it because in the past, this has affected some playing time for him because they don't want this kid to get hurt. They don't know how to handle it. I think maybe.
Yeah, they have a bias because they don't want him to get hurt, but yet he's willing to say, I'm ready to play.
Exactly.
But here's just something you need to do to help me so I can play.
Yeah, and so this year I was very proud of him, but everyone had to stand up the first week of football camp this year and tell something about their stuff that not that many people know. And he went in front of the entire football team and told them that he has adrenal insufficiency, that he needs this shot, that his athletic trainer was helping him, and they were all like, I can't believe you play. I can't believe you're doing this. He's just been lucky to have good friends in college that have been supportive. And he didn't know how it would go, so I'm glad that when he shared that with everyone there, haven't excluded him from anything, and they're all very good about it and all watching him.
Yeah. Half the battle, I think we all know this, and then you said it, Darlene, is it's the awareness. They didn't know that there was a gap in processes or there was no process. And for Isaac, I just need you to know I have this. Doesn't affect me who I am, but I need your help to make sure I can do all the things that I need to do in my life. But it's a huge stepping stone for a young person to not feel like they're different or an outlier to the conversation. Congratulations. Isaac sounds like he's really advocating for himself, and that's the population you want. And this is that you need to hear firsthand, here's why I need it. And I think that's what really helps when you're trying to get legislation passed. So is there anything else about Danny's dose in terms of like federal regulation or anything else that as our listeners are listening that they can help, or if, their state doesn't have it, do they just contact you? How does it go, Darlene?
Yeah, as far as the state level, same thing. We have 3 states that have passed bills, 16 that have done state scope of practice changes. And just as soon as those words come out of my mouth, the next sentence is, that is not a stopping point. The box has not been checked. That's one box of several. Implementation has to happen. The people in positions of leadership in the state need to know how many people there are in that state that need specialized care. They need to be made aware of your needs. If it's a state that hasn't done a state scope of practice or a legislative change yet, then it definitely takes families. I've honestly had some not so great legislators say, oh, it's just that grandma from Missouri. So completely disregarding me. Unless you have people in the state that live there that are their constituents or can affect their constituency with some of them, we're not going to get anywhere. So yeah, absolutely reach out to me. Federally, we are working on some federal legislation. We were able to get an amendment to some existing appropriations funding. There's a federal rural health grant that for some reason EMS got left out of. It only centered on hospitals and fire. So we were able to get wording added to that to allow EMS to now be part of that 2.1 million per year. And it's very designated to EMS education for the treatment of patients with specialized care needs, and particularly those with specialty medications. We were very precise in our wording, and it went through, so we're happy. We have to renew that every year. And the goal, and I'll just say this to the universe and everybody that wants to help, our goal is a Danny's Dose EMS Education Act that will be $5 million per year for education of emergency personnel, pre-hospital and hospital. That's our big goal. So we're working toward that. And in the perfect world, I really want federal liability protections. I'm getting a lot of pushback on that. And I can't tell you exactly why, but a lot of pushback. So we agreed as a board, okay, we'll step back and we'll do the educational piece because it's still awareness and it's getting the education out there. And we'll see how things go. And as more states make regulatory change and we're doing more education and we see the care improve, I think maybe we may see that there needs to be some federal liability protections, and maybe that'll come down the road. I don't know, but we're not going to stop until then. And we're going to keep pushing our other states that haven't made any changes yet to make those needed changes. Because the other thing too, this protects the paramedics.
Yes.
I have to say, I cannot imagine having the training, knowing I can mix a shot, mix medication and either do an intramuscular injection or an IV in my sleep, basically.
Mm-hmm.
But yet words on a page prohibit me from doing that. And if they go ahead and do it, they can be fined and fired. So it's their livelihood. And if heaven forbid something still went wrong with that patient, they wouldn't get any legal protections from their state legal team. So many people sometimes are very almost mean when they'll talk to me and they'll say, those paramedics just need to do their job. Everybody needs to realize that at that moment, they have to decide between doing what they know in their heart is right.
Right.
And taking the chance that their entire livelihood could go straight down the drain. And that's
Right.
a hard decision. So we really, truly fight as much for every paramedic out there and really every medical director to make sure they're protected, to allow the regulations within their service to be
Right.
changed so that they are protected and they can do the right thing.
They got into the business because they want to help. They want to do the
Right.
right thing. They want to save people,
Yeah.
right?
But
And
that's
so-
our world, is we're so highly I can never say it. And so then it creates these other outliers when same with doctors. And so they have to carry
Mhm.
high liability insurance because of it. And then that's what costs all of our medical care to rise up. That is great information. The reason why we started this podcast was that we wanted to help families that have rare medical complexities to get helpful tips and tricks to live their life successfully. And I think the one thing that we've learned from your call today is that you really do drive to empower and to enable and to get things done. And so I wanted to thank you for your time and doing the work that both of you have done. And so I think Haley and I both look forward to helping you because this is a passion of ours.
So I think in summary, every single patient / caregiver of a patient, parent of a patient, you really have to go meet your local EMS service, start there, because there is a trickle, I call that a trickle up effect.
Yep.
When you come in and you say, we live in your service area and we have X condition, probably it's going to scare the crap out of them. And then after that meeting, they're going to call their regional or their state level and say, hey, we've got a family with X condition. We don't have any education on it. We need to get the ball rolling. So if everybody that hears this message will get in your car and go meet your local EMS service, look at how many EMS services that will be spoken to, how much awareness for your condition, for other conditions, and pull our website in. Call me. I always answer my phone. If you're in Minnesota, call Andrea. She always answers her phone too. That is the best first step to really getting everybody cued in on awareness. And then the second step is, okay, if our state doesn't have a regulatory change, what's our next step? And definitely call me because we'll be there to help and pull in the other rare disease groups. But that is really the best first thing. We have a lot of information on our website, even information on what a good treatment plan includes, because I know it can be daunting. And since I've been doing this 9 years, I just decided to make outlines of things to try to help. And I have a template of emergency orders too.
It's remarkable what you've accomplished.
Thank you. Thank you, ladies, so much.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
If you liked today's topic or have comments, questions, or thoughts on what else you would like us to cover, please visit rarelyfamiliar.com or connect with us on all the social channels. Resources will be listed in our show notes, and we'll be back next time with another discussion around living life successfully with rare medical complexities. Thanks for joining us on the journey.